Hey guys, welcome to Tea Time at the Water's Edge, and this is part 2 of our Motherhood in the Little Years series. All right, well, now I want to transition into some more practical questions, somewhat rapid fire, and then we're also going to answer a listener question, which we'll get to a little bit later. But my first question is, what are some practical ways that you remember that you taught your kids the Bible or about the gospel? You know, I would say like ages 4 and under, 5 and under.
We did a lot of singing songs that I grew up with. I still love those songs. We're going to the mansion on the Happy Day Express. And things like that where it tells the gospel and talking about the good news. And we have lots of little Christian virtues books, like board books and things like that that the girls can look at. And read to them a lot, talked to them a lot. I remember talking to Kate when she was in her carrier, wherever we went, and we would talk about when we're outside, look at what God created, you know, the trees and the grass, and using every one of those moments that I could. I mean, and I'm not perfect. Believe me, I'm not even close. Right. But trying to use all of those things to bring back and make a connection or tie in, or, hey, this is reminding me of, you know, the Bible story, you know, or some kind of connection like that. And prayers and all kinds of things when they're little that makes connections. There was a little beginner's Bible that we had. Steve and Lisa also gave us another devotional, which was good to do because family devotion time when they're little is rough, man. And as a teacher, I had some expectations sometimes. I remember one time, and Lucy would be okay with me saying this, she kept giving me the answer Mosef. So she's taking Moses and Joseph and putting it together. And I'm like, there's not a Mosef. But, you know, they're trying and knowing that you're going to have wiggly times in between and getting what you can. One night she kept praying. We would do family prayer. She was little. And she would say, Amy. And we're like, who's Amy? We don't even know an Amy. I'm like, you know, we know Amy, the preschool mom. I'm like, who's Amy? Now I lay me. She was saying, now I yay me. And she knew we didn't know what she was saying, and she was cracking up. But just having that as constant talk in your house and things like that are practical ways that you can teach the gospel to little ones.
Yeah. Same thing. I mean, our kids at that age, I believe Steve was possibly a children's pastor at that time. So they were just constantly around the gospel, like lessons. At home, it would definitely be music. It would definitely be like filling their bookshelves with Christian books that they would read, little Bible stories and things like that. Prayer. We always prayed at the dinner table. We always prayed with them before they went to bed. And it's so hard for me to remember 4. They may have like started learning to pray on their own, you know, before bedtime or anything like that, or something like that. So most music that they listened to was probably always Christian music at that time. Like in the car, like we were very mindful and watchful of like what was playing, shows, little movie clips, VeggieTales, Bible Man, different things like that. So I don't think at that age it was like a sit down necessarily type of time, but we tried to ingrain it in a little bit of everything. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because you can't really sit down as much as you want to. You want to make them sit down and like learn their first memory verse when they're 2. But yeah, I think that's good. Like what you were saying, you know, if you're going for a walk and you're pointing out different things, I try to do that as well. But it reminded me of that verse in Deuteronomy where it says to, you know, teach your kids God's laws, like when you sit and when you walk and when you lie down. And I'm paraphrasing, but but I think that's good advice, especially for when they're little, because yeah, you're not going to sit down and give them a whole like Bible lesson because they're not going to understand it. But
short things in the kids' Bible stories are good too. I think too, thinking about our kids' ministry, our kids come home with a journal page, and when they're little, it has like a family. Not only does it, retell kind of what the kids learn, the main point, the big picture question, but it has family activity. So I remember one of them when we were talking about Abraham and Isaac, and one of the things was that they had to sacrifice something that they really, and it was a great hands-on thing. Our kids were pre-K, it was Oasis Kids Junior, but they were able to know enough. And I remember one of my kids, I think it was Lucy, wanting to sacrifice a pack of fruit snacks, which would have been a big deal, right? Yeah. But see, just using the resources that you already have and interweaving it into your daily life, I think is good. And to have a bedtime routine where you have that, and a dinner where you're going to pray at mealtime. And I know Penny already does. She gets her little hands. Even if she comes over and it's for a snack and she's already done it every time she go and pray. Yeah. So you've done a good job. I think that's good. Then they get used to those things.
Yeah. This morning when we were at core seminar and she wanted to get a donut, and I said, you have to wait until Pastor Adam prays and then we can get a donut. And as soon as he finished praying, she was so loud. She was like, now get a donut. She's like, donut. It's like, amen. Okay. Like, yeah, you're right. We prayed.
Oh, cute.
Yeah.
Too cute.
So my next question is, how should we respond to toddler tantrums? Because I feel like there's a lot of mixed advice about this. I hear a lot of like, oh, just ignore it, or you just try and distract them and like move on to like the next thing.
I think it depends personally on each kid. My two kids are very different and tantrumed in different ways. And I think it depends on where you're at. I think, obviously if you're in Walmart, you're not going to ignore, I hope not, the tantrum that's happening. You're going to quietly, gently speak to them or talk to them. Some kids need when they're tantruming, a scoop up and a hug and a kiss. And, you're going to deal with it right there. Or sometimes there are appropriate times where you can't ignore it. You can go throw a tantrum up in your room right now. And when you're done, you can come back and join us. Mm-hmm. And for the rest of the family to continue on in the fun so they realize what they're missing out on. Mm-hmm. But I think the most important part is how you wrap it up. When you come back together, you have a discussion, you talk about it, you pray about it, you say, you know what, this wasn't the best way to do it. I remember having role model time with Lucy. Like we'd model, like I'd pretend to be the kid and I'd throw myself on the floor or whatever, and she'd laugh, but it gives them a picture of how silly and what it looks like. But I think it definitely depends on the moment, but I think setting expectations ahead of time and talking about it after so you learn from that is what is most important.
Yeah. And don't we're talking 4 and under, so you can't let a long time go between that conversation.
That's right.
Like it needs to be had. So if you need to step away from the party or you need to do something like
That's
you
true.
need to make that a priority, because they're not going to remember an hour down the road when you get home and you're like, do you remember when you did this? No. Yeah. So I think that was, we tried to do that. Yeah. So tantrums are hard, and sometimes it's dependent on what are they throwing a tantrum for. Yeah. There's some times where you do need to be a little bit more firm and what method you use. But, yeah, I don't think I would just let my child lay on the ground throwing a tantrum and ignore it. I like what you said though, like sending them away so they realize like we don't do that. Like there's a consequence there. But like if my child was just laying here throwing a fit, I don't think I would just be like, oh, ignore them until they're done. Yeah. That's just not how I brought up my kids. So I would definitely address the issue. Yeah. And sometimes you do need just a little moment, one, either to control like yourself or make you like figure out why that happened in order to have a conversation with them. But just not letting there be too much of a time gap where your kid doesn't even remember what was going on or why they got upset. So, yeah.
Do you remember anything, like in moments where you're trying to discipline them, do you remember anything that you said to like bring it back to God or his word? Or because they're so small, but you do want them to know ultimately, like it's not just you that they need to listen to. It's because God says, whatever.
Yes. I can't think of a specific, but I know I'd be like, Mommy's doing this because I love God, and my job is to help train you in the way that you should go. That's what the Bible says. And God wants that for you too. He wants the best life for you. So we need to make sure that we are thinking about how God wants us to behave and what he wants us to do so that, we can please him. And in the same hand, help them understand it's not about behavior modification, but your heart and the matter of your heart.
Yeah. I think it's easy to use like sharing or like being mean to somebody.
Yeah.
Or if they were, Michaela went through like this biting phase. So it was easy to bring that back. Like why we don't do that scripturally. Like, but some things I think at that young age is so hard for them to understand. But I mean, if you just speak it, hopefully not over and over, but if you have to speak it over and over, they'll eventually grasp it and realize it. Or gosh, kids have such a great memory. Once they do learn it, they'll be like, oh, that's why mom and dad always said that or something. Yeah.
Do you recall any kind of conflict in your marriage regarding like how you were going to discipline your kids? Or if not, do you have any encouragement for somebody that maybe they're disagreeing with their spouse about how to discipline their little ones?
I don't remember having a conflict because I think Adam and I kind of work together. We kind of have a set plan. Now you can't plan for everything, but in that moment you're kind of working together to do it. I would say though, my encouragement would be if you don't, that would be very difficult. And I think what would be helpful is if you could find a way to compromise on it, especially if it were be something about spanking or something like that. That would be very hard. So you have to be able to find a way where you're both going to compromise, but you want your child, you both have the best mind frame for your child. You want your child to behave. You want them to do well for themselves and take care of themselves and be safe. So you sit down and have a conversation. How's this going to look? What are you okay with? What am I okay with? Why are we doing this? And if you can, definitely pray with them and think about it. And it is helpful to talk to other couples, especially ones who have been down the road. So maybe if there's another couple that they would be willing to speak with, I think that would be helpful too, to kind of say, what did you guys do? How'd you solve it? Because when you're parents of little kids, it's you two trying to figure it out, right? So it's helpful to talk to someone who's already been there. So if there's someone that they could trust or talk to, that might be helpful also.
Yeah, I would agree. I don't think we've ever disagreed, but I feel like the conversation is always ongoing because situations change, kids change. You have one kid that you can discipline this way, and then your second comes around and you're like, well, that's not working. So
That's right.
Now we need to figure something else out. Or so I think being in conversation with one another all the time and keeping the other one informed, like if you had a discipline when one wasn't around, so they know what's going on. And then they know like, okay, if they do this again, like they've already been in trouble for it this time. And that the help we've got from other parents, that's so good. Just asking questions, being vulnerable, like it's okay to not know what to do, and just wanting to know what's best. So I think that's wise advice.
All right, so now we're going to transition into a listener question. I think this was submitted pretty recently. Let me just read it really quick if I can find it. All right, so this says, as a young mom myself, I have encountered other mothers who state that they cannot attend church because of their baby or toddler who either doesn't do well in the nursery or would be a disruption in the service. I usually remain quiet when met with that reasoning because I want to be gracious to other situations, but I know that we should not forsake the meeting together, especially in a challenging season such as young motherhood. I know that in other generations, this did not seem to be an issue I am aware of. How should I respond to encourage my fellow sister how important being a part of the church is in in-person attendance? Do you have any practical advice or biblical examples of how the church should look with young children? So there's kind of two questions there. I have my own thoughts, but I want to see what you guys say first.
I mean, I think a lot has to do with the church. Like, I don't think I ever struggled with that. I know it was always hard, but we always try to make it work. I always try to make it, never always happen, but I always try to make sure, like, okay, babies need to be fed at this time. Maybe nap will lead them, through this. We always had help from other members of the church. So I think like the church needs to be mindful of that, of families with young moms. And if young families, if they're able to step in to help while something's going on at church, doing that. But I think a lot of that is not on the church, but like just the dynamics of the church. Yeah. I don't know how far I want to go into that. Yeah. Like I need to think about some things before I say them.
So I think the first question was more like how should she encourage this person who thinks that they can't go to church because of their little kid?
Well, I think they're not alone, first of all. No. There's a lot, and I mean, I think the church provides some good resources. First of all, we have a nursery, and I know it can be hard for kids to come into the nursery. I filled in and worked in the nursery last Sunday, and some of them cry. But you know what? I talked to a couple parents, and I'm like, you know what? Why don't you give it a try? Keep sticking with it. And I remember that too. I remember Kate having a difficult time going into the nursery for a while. And I think it's just consistent. Let them know, I'll be back. It's okay, because they're going to be okay while they're in there. They're with safe people. They're going to be able to play. They're going to probably hear a Bible story. It's good time for them too. And as a mom of young kids, that's also time for you to go and be spiritually fed as well. So I think it's beneficial for both. As far as like nap times and things like that go, it can complicate it, but I think if you're consistent and stick with it, it will be okay. People will understand. And, if you want to try to bring your young one into the service with you, that's all in how comfortable you feel. I feel like we do have a lot of young kids. I feel like we have young families, and I feel like people are supportive. People would be willing to help and, try to come alongside them. And I think it is important to be a part of the church body and to come. So I think give the nursery a try if you're okay with it. And if not, do bring something, to help your child be quiet or comfortable or, entertained to a certain extent while they're there, because it is great to have them in the church. I feel like they learn a lot. They get to see people worshiping God. They know that. They see mom and dad singing and praying and preaching, but they may not get as much out of that as they would in the little kid class, on their level.
Yeah. Yeah. The first thing that came to my mind, I would be curious if this person, like how much church is actually a priority to them. And if they, like, do you take your kids out to a restaurant? Do you take them out other places? Because in my opinion, taking our toddler to a restaurant is a lot harder than taking her to church. Because at a restaurant, you just have to sit the whole time. There's nothing to really do.
You're waiting. Yeah.
But at church, you can get up, you can go to another room, you can, there's different things that you can do. But yeah, so not that I'm saying this person's making an excuse, but I just would question like how much they prioritize that. Because if it is a priority, like you do want to show your kids, like, this is what we do. We go to church, even if it's, interrupting some, your nap time, maybe a little bit. Something that we did with Penny when she was still napping around like the 10 a.m. mark, we would wake her up an hour early so that she could nap before we could leave for church. And yeah, I would do the same thing, like try to schedule,
trying to figure out the schedule to where it was like more conducive to them, and it's not like interrupting to where they're like a hot mess type of deal. But
it was harder for us because I didn't want to wake up an hour early on Sunday, but it made it easier. She was in a better mood, and I knew that she would still nap when we got home. She wouldn't fall asleep in the car. But yeah, and it is hard putting them in the nursery when they don't understand yet that you're going to come back for them, but they're fine.
I think they'll get it, as long as you're consistent. Yeah, and you say, like Daniel Tiger says, which I didn't have the benefit of my kids having, but my nephews had it. Grown-ups always come back. They do.
Yeah. I was going to say something else too. Oh, I think her other question was about biblical examples of how the church should look with young children. I'm not 100% sure what she means about that, but I do think, like you were saying, it's important for people to offer, like, hey, do you want me to hold your baby for 5 minutes? Like, do you need to go do something? Yeah. And I feel bad if maybe this person had been to a church where maybe she kind of got the side eye if her kid was crying during the service or something like that, which I know when your baby cries, the first thing you think of is like, everybody's looking at me and I need to get out of here. Yeah. But that's always been like because of my own, in my own head. It's never been because of something here. But
yeah. I think unfortunately though, there probably are churches that are like that. So that's where I was like trying like to go, but like not every church is like that. So it should look like a gracious church. Like you shouldn't be getting the side eye. You shouldn't be getting little whispers or anything like that. Like people should be supportive. People should be gracious. The pastor shouldn't be calling you out. Like, there's just things that make young families feel more welcome than some churches might make some families feel.
And I think she mentioned that she didn't know that this had happened in the past, but I am sure this is an age-old thing. I mean, kids are kids. They're going to make noise. There were not kids that sat any quieter, I don't think. I think it was how it was handled and things like that. Mm-hmm. And I think church has changed over time where kids are not always in the service the whole time. Yeah. And there are times where it's appropriate and they are, some family Sundays and things like that. So I think I would encourage them and let them know it probably is not the only time and it probably won't be the only time, but they're not alone.
Yeah, especially at this church. But yeah, and I also was thinking about the passages where, children are coming up to Jesus and the disciples are like, no, leave them alone. And he said, no, let the little children come to me. So,
I think being here has really, like watching you younger mothers, especially like on family Sundays, because we've always been on like at the front pew, like ever since we've had kids, we've been on the front pew, even at our former church. And there I always felt like,
everyone's watching us.
Oh, yeah. Like Michaelin's laying on the ground, like coloring and stuff. And I always felt like I shouldn't allow that type of behavior, just because it just felt like it was just a more formal atmosphere type of deal. So I always felt like the angst. Thankfully, I had parents that sat in the balcony. So I'd be like, give mom the look and they'd come down. But like here, I'm just like, it is such a beautiful thing to see when the kids are in there. Steve and Adam, like, Adam's always like, Steve, why you always leave on family Sunday?
I know. It seemed like he did.
But they do so good. Like, it's not like, I don't know. I just feel like, not that this church is like so different from other ones, but it's been different from like what I've experienced before. So like just the graciousness and the parents like being, I'm sure they're still like, but like just having the kids there and the kids know like what they're allowed to do and what they're not allowed to do, and like sitting on the floor, that's okay. Like it's just, yeah, the mentality of the church members. And yeah.
And another thing too that comes with, especially when you have a baby that maybe they're too young to be in the nursery or they're just not ready yet, and you're in the service but you're having to get up and you're not really listening, and that can be hard sometimes, because there's been some weeks where I like just didn't listen to the sermon. I had no idea what he was talking about because I just was in and out. But and I don't know if you had days like that when you had little ones, but what are some practical things that you did to still contribute to your growth spiritually when you're trying to juggle all these things?
The blessing of it is that it's recorded. Yeah. So you can watch it again, which I think is huge. But I think too, talking with your spouse about, hey, what did I miss? Fill me in. What are some things? I think, and then your own personal devotional time. I feel like too, it is helpful. I know I'm speaking about now, but I remember when my Lucy was sick and I couldn't put them in the nursery, but they really were well enough to come, and trying to sit with them in church, but it just didn't work. It was too noisy. But if you can go into another room or whatever to hear the sermon, but I think your own personal devotions are that much more important as well.
And being connected to a community group.
Yes.
Especially like how our community groups run, where they're based on the sermon. So and now having the recordings, like I don't think our church did that when we were like when I had little ones at my other church. So it would just be, you know, my own personal study or talking to Steve or it was a little bit hard for Steve to like help me during those times. So I was thankful for my family just because
he's working.
So I was thankful for my family. But for those that do have a spouse that come, like also taking, like it doesn't always have to be the mom. It doesn't always have to be the dad. Like just tag teaming those Sundays or whatever. Like, hey, this Sunday I'll be the one to whatever, or however they work it out. But yeah.
And I've heard people say too, like your Bible reading, you don't need to spend like 30 minutes reading your Bible. That's a good thing, but sometimes you just can't do that. And nowadays it's nice, like you can listen to the Bible if you're, which I've done before, if you're trying to multitask, just trying to absorb something. Yes. And I saw a post recently that was this young mom saying, you know, if you like sit back and reflect on all the moments you have, like pockets of time you have in your day where you're just kind of sitting there, like if you're like, you know, giving your kids a bath and they're playing and you're just sitting there and you want to pull out your phone, or if you're like waiting for the oven to preheat and you're just standing there, you can read your Bible instead of pulling out your phone or, you know, wasting, because that really is so much time added up if you think of all those little moments. Is there anything that you wish you knew or you did differently with little ones?
I guess I had grown up babysitting, nannying. You know, my major was elementary education. I'd taken childhood development classes. So I felt like I was pretty set. And Adam was confident in me teaching him, right? So, but I think even with that, you are not in control of all things. You are going to learn as you go. And I think when mistakes happen, we are not perfect. That's why we have a perfect God. I still, even, you know, in speaking with Adam, like, I feel like, oh, some days I failed so bad as a mom. You're going to. We are not perfect people. And so that's the chance to show our kids the gospel. Point them back to Christ. You know, go back and apologize. Mommy messed up when she said this or did this, or I mishandled this. This is how it should have been. And so I think I wish I would have known too, like, you're not always going to be a slam dunk, you know, A+ parent. You're not, and you're human. And as long as you're not always giving into your flesh, God will hear your prayers and he will know that you're earnestly seeking to be the best parent that you can be.
Yeah. I mean, that's hard to like think, because I feel like Satan can definitely make me feel like, well, you should have done a whole lot of things differently. And I know that there are things, I think for me, just one thing that like comes to mind is, don't start crying, is like just being fully present. Like it's so hard these days with having our phones. But even when they were littler, like just being fully present in their moments, and being willing to be silly, to be fun, to, you know, because it's always been like, dad's the fun one, mom's the strict one, or, you know, whatever. So, and like even my kids now, they're like, Mom, remember when you used to do these things or whatever? Like, so I think just like not losing that would be something that I wish. And like even now, like when I'm thinking about it, I'm like, I'm going to do that. Next time we go do something, I'm going to do it. And I hope I do, but I don't know if I will. But like, I don't know. So I'm sure there were like some discipline things that, I mean, we all lose our cool sometimes. But like apologizing, like I do think I did that right. I don't think there was ever a time where if I did mess up that I didn't like say, you know what, mommy was wrong and I'm sorry. And, you know, I hope you can forgive me. And they always do, man, they always do. So, yeah.
Yeah. I was reading this I think it's just called Parenting by Paul David Tripp. And it's like 14 gospel principles or something. And he was talking, there's a chapter on grace, and he was talking about how you want your kids to see that you need grace just as much as they do. It's not you know, you're not the perfect one that's making them obey you because you're you. It's because, you know, God is over the both of you. And that like took such a weight off of me because I don't know, I think so far ahead in the future, and I'm like, I don't want to ever like mess up. I don't want her to, you know, think that, I don't know. Yeah. And yeah, I think that just helps so much to know, like, you can show your kids that you're a sinner. Like, you should show them that. That's because if you don't, then you know, when they grow up, they're going to be like, well, you acted like you were perfect, and you know, and you knew everything, and why am I, you know, all messed up and stuff. But yeah, it is a really good book if you're looking for a parenting resource. Is there any last encouragements that you guys have or verses that you wanted to share? I have one if you don't.
I thought of Proverbs 22:6, train a child in the way they should go, and when they were old, they will not depart. And I believe that to be true. I believe that with parents that I've talked with, where they're not sure where their kids are, their faith is later. But I believe that if you set that foundation, God will be faithful. And my other encouragement is it goes by so fast. Just enjoy each season and be grateful for what time you have.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, man. Yeah, I remember a couple weeks ago, I was really fixated on Penny not being able to drink out of a cup. And I was like, when is she going to be able to do this? Like I think it was like her 2-year appointment, and the doctor was like, oh, can she use a fork? Can she use a cup? And I was like, yeah. But she, you know, and I was so worried about it. Like, when is she ever going to do this? And I feel like you can fixate a lot on those things. Yes, you can. And then like the next week, like she can drink out of a cup now, and it's fine. So yeah. And it does. I feel like now that I'm taking out all of like Penny's baby clothes to reuse, I'm like, man, I feel like I just use these, and now I'm pulling them out again. Yes. Yeah. There was one story that I wanted to share. So we have a 4-month-old at home. And so I think it was definitely the first week that I was home alone with the both of them. And I remember I was like walking around the house I was trying to do multiple things, like get lunch ready, and the baby was crying, and Penny had to go down for a nap, and there's like all these things happening. And it was one of those days where I was trying to, like I said before, just try and catch up and do all these things to check off boxes in my head. And one of my favorite verses, which I'll read it in a second, but this old coworker from the pregnancy center, I'm not even like friends with her. Like, I just would see her in passing. I didn't really talk to her that much, but she had a baby recently too, around the same time. And she got my phone number somehow, and she texted me a picture of this verse that it's like my life verse basically for this season of life. And it just was like, wow, like the Lord is so kind just in those daily moments, and he knows exactly what we need. But anyway, the verse is 2 Corinthians 12, 9 and 10. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. For the sake of Christ, then, I am content with weaknesses, insults, hardships, persecutions, and calamities. For when I am weak, then I am strong. And I feel like in this season of young motherhood, that can really take a big weight off of you mentally, to know that like God is our strength. It's not of our own. You know, we can't muster up the strength that we need daily. Like it only comes from the Lord. It's not going to come from ourselves. And we can show our kids that. And I just love that verse, especially for this season of life. But
yeah, someone shared with me when I had little kids, and I was probably having a really hard day or week or month or whatever it was, but just feeling like I was really lacking. And she was like, Lisa, in those moments that you feel like you're failing, that's when like the Lord protects your kids. Like he fills in those gaps when you can't fill them in on, you know, and I was just like, that just gave me such a peace. Again, it's not an allowance to be a lazy mom, but just to know, like, we are not going to be perfect, but in those moments of our imperfection, God protects our kids and he fills in the gaps. And I was just like, that just gave me such a peace to rest in that.
Because you want them to trust him ultimately. You don't want them to think that you're perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think that's it. If you guys have any topics or questions that you'd like us to discuss, you can go on wec.life. I believe it might still be just like the coffee time card, but you can submit a topic or question on there. Please like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel if you haven't done that. Click the notification bell so you know when we post new videos. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, please leave us a 5-star review. Or 4 stars, that's fine, but we prefer 5. And yeah, we'll see you next time.